While we're all pretty familiar with giving feedback on papers, I think a proper examination of the rhetoric we're employing is necessary. The way you phrase your feedback can have a much larger effect on how your client interprets it than you may at first think. So today we're looking at indirect, directive, and direct feedback, and how student writers often interpret those feedback styles. Indirect feedback is a command that's wrapped up all pretty in polite rhetoric, like, "Could you please pass the salt?" Of course, it's not a real question, as the asker really only expects one response. Yes, certainly. It's kind of like the passive-aggressive posturing your mother uses when she asks you to do something. "Do you think maybe you could call me once in a while?" It's phrased as a question, but the expectation is that you will follow through with the request. Of course, it doesn't always work out that way. Many students will see feedback phrased in such a wishy-washy manner and outright disregard it. "Could you expand this paragraph?" Well, yeah, I could. Or I could go play Call of Duty. See, the problem with indirect feedback is that it makes the criticism sound superfluous, like it's something that could be changed, but that change isn't necessarily vital. Unfortunately, this is a pretty widely used strategy for giving students feedback because it maintains an illusion of politeness. No one wants to come off sounding like a know-it-all, so they use polite posturing to underplay any undertones of undue criticism in their feedback. Unfortunately, this leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation, so it's not really ideal, especially when giving asynchronous feedback. If this is indirect feedback over here, the other end of the spectrum is directive feedback over here. Directive feedback is a no-bullshit approach, where you just give a command outright. It's a no-nonsense approach that gets your point across in a blunt manner. Directive feedback comes with its own set of difficulties, however. While it does cut right to the chase, it gives very little insight as to why the suggestion is being made. The student may know that their paragraph needs expanding, but they may not know why or even how to do so. As a result, it too leaves something to be desired. So if indirect feedback is over here, and directive feedback is over here, then direct feedback is in the Goldilocks zone right here. Direct feedback makes an assessment and offers some direct alternatives for handling the problem identified. That extra bit of context can go a long way in helping a student understand not only what needs changing in their paper, but more importantly, why. For example, directive feedback would sound a little something like this. "This paragraph seems to lack the necessary depth to fully support your point. Try to include some additional evidence that can bolster the argument you present in the beginning of this paragraph." This can be a great way to introduce a mini lesson in your session, especially if it's concerning a recurring error. Notice how all three methods can essentially say the same thing, but each one can be interpreted in many different ways. An indirect suggestion can come off too wishy-washy and does not act as a proper call to action. "Well, you could, maybe move this paragraph to another part of the paper, if you want to." Directive feedback is far too cold and impolite and does not properly explain what is problematic. Move the paragraph to the end of the paper. Direct feedback hits the sweet spot in between direct and directive while giving additional information. Notice that this paragraph really seems to wrap up your argument nicely, but it's situated in the middle of your paper right now. If you moved it closer to the end of the paper, it would serve as a really great transition into your conclusion. That extra bit of contextualization is what really helps your client internalize your advice for the next time they write a paper. Without a proper explanation of why we're making such and such a change, it's a lot more difficult to avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. For this reason, it's important to utilize direct feedback, especially for recurring issues. Happy writing, and thanks for watching.